Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'd just like to start by thanking. It's really special to get this award from such a rich and diverse and experienced organization. It feels really special to also be amongst the other laureates. This recognition it's sinking in how valuable it is, even as we have spent the last few days together. I will try and respond in some sense and speak in a way with trying to address thematically what we're trying to talk about in terms of inclusion and in terms of art and society and inclusive societies, as well as in a way try to go through my own journey of work. If I look back, most of my work has been about violence and responding to violence. I think initially it was almost like a series of murders, that one was responding to assassinations, deaths, murders, and finding different ways to react, to respond, to confront, to fight. And I remember that almost after a few years, maybe pretty early on, almost every time I would come back from filming or at the end of a film when I was presenting a film, but usually when I would come back from filming, I was not really excited or relating to what I had got. I just had a sense that there was a lot that I did not get. And over and over again, I would keep getting a feeling that, I knew what was happening. I could understand that there was something there, but I did not know how to bring it back, how to articulate it, how to speak about it. And in many ways, this was, it seemed like as I was making work, I was also getting aware of an accumulation of what was unsaid, unspeakable, untellable, and not necessarily in a painful way. It's just in a way that I did not know how to access it. Thinking further about it, that it became quite clear that this unsaid that was there amongst the people that I would be filming or the areas that I went to, there was not one type of unsaid. There was not one type of silence. There were many types of silences. And sometimes there was a silence that was 30 years old. And sometimes there was a silence that was right on the edge. It felt like it was about to burst open at any point. And sometimes there was a silence that felt like you could hear everything else, every single sound was audible, louder. And sometimes you would run into a silence which was willful. It was a self-imposed silence. Again, you would run into another kind of silence which seemed to have been silent for so long that it actually had lost itself and was confused. And one, asked that, did this all disappear? Where did it all go in a certain way? And it became clear that it didn't disappear and that all of these silences actually were archived, and not archived in the way that I was familiar with archiving, not on paper, not on text, not in a computer, but they were archived in multiple ways. They were archived in a stone, in a tree, in a mark, in a weave, in a song, in a design. They were submerged and hidden, but not disappeared. And so in a way, I learned that the silences existed. The silences were embedded, were archived in multiple ways, and quite obviously, if they were archived in multiple ways, they were also recalled in multiple ways. And there was no one way to recall it. So for instance, if this was the window from where we saw them take Auntie down the street, paraded her naked and took her away, then the window was the archive. The window was the method for recalling. The only way you would, if you needed to recall that particular event, you recalled it through the window. Or if you wanted to recall it, you recalled by wearing the sarong. A sarong where, for instance, the attack, the struggle for justice was woven in the design of the sarong. So every time you needed to recall it, you needed to wear it. Sometimes a silence was so difficult that it became like a secret. And then it became camouflaged. It was completely hidden, renamed, and buried deep for almost forever. And then after a while, it seemed to become too heavy to contain and to remain. And then the silence would be handed over. And you would run into a silence that actually got camouflaged and recamouflaged and recamouflaged as it kept getting handed over, and it would keep traveling. So it would travel maybe 1,000 miles and change its name, its appearance, its clothes, its geographical identity, even though it was the original silence, but it would just be something totally different at another point in time. As a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as somebody responding, how do you respond to this kind of silence, which has traveled and camouflaged and reincarnated itself so many different times, so many different ways, protecting itself as well, and the original person? One way to relate to this kind of silence is actually to relate to your own silence. That if it was possible to relate to the many kinds of silences that are within me or within ourselves, then perhaps I would be able to understand this kind of silence. Another way, perhaps to relate to this or even to comprehend this, was to look at what, for the purpose of briefly illustrating within these few minutes, I would say that another way of navigating this terrain was to look, maybe re-look, at the question of crime, evidence, violence, and also perhaps to re-look at us, what I call us good people. I felt the need to look at all four of these things all over again. And it seemed that if a crime was continuing repeatedly, then either we don't see it, or we're not even being able to comprehend it. So it felt that it was necessary, relating to this silence, it felt it was necessary to not accept any fixed definition of the crime. It felt necessary to not accept any fixed methodology to evaluate the crime. It felt necessary to not accept any fixed definition of evidence. So what was permissible evidence? What was impermissible evidence? It felt that in order to understand the meaning of the crime, the scale of the crime, the depth of the impact of the crime, perhaps we needed another set of tools, another set of methodologies, and perhaps in some way, poetry could be presented as evidence, formally, not esoterically, not metaphorically, not just simply philosophically, but really presented as evidence to comprehend crime. I'd like to just conclude on this whole question of us good people. All along the way, also it became, bit by bit, maybe a little bit clearer, that just like with violence, you see pain, you see trauma, but there's another web that exists around violence, which is of fear, of guilt, of unshakable, absolutely unshakable prejudice, of distortion. But if you push it a little bit further, you see another spectrum, which is you see, and that's what I say, that Okay, you see another spectrum of what I would say is the lie, of the half-truth, of the desire to cause violence, to cause pain, of selective, conscious selective indifference to certain kinds of pain and suffering. And we are often used to seeing all of this in outside, in them people. And I felt it was necessary at some point to actually embrace this doubt, to embrace this desire to cause pain, to embrace this doubt, to embrace this inadequacy, to embrace the fear of shame as part of ourselves as well. And perhaps if we were to be able to do that, then we may have a language which would be terribly fragile, possibly quite beautiful, and possibly quite potent as well. Thank you.